Hi guys, welcome to my part 2 blood gas mini series. I've worked pretty hard to get this one out, so you weren't waiting too long. I know a lot of people got back to me about the first video, which was amazing. I think it did help a lot of people to understand that first part of blood gas and to sort of put it into an easier way of thinking about it, which certainly helps me. Within this second video, we're going to be talking about base excess and the anion gap. These are sort of, they're used in conjunction with what we talked about in part 1, but I did just want to break it down into manageable bite-sized chunks. And these are also, I see them as more of an add-on as well, as a bit of a second stage in that determining what is going on process. But that's the way I view it. I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't yet watched part 1, please do. I think it would be good for you to watch part 1 first and then hop on to part 2. So first of all, let's look at base excess. When we talk about the base excess, we're essentially talking about the amount of base or the amount of acid that is required to restore a sample of blood to a pH of 7.4 or to normal. And what is considered normal in base excess are these figures here. So -4 to +4. That is normal. Your sample can sit normally in and around there, and it would be deemed normal. If, as you can see, the more minus we go, I have this in red because this is getting more acidic, and anything more minus than -4 is considered an acidic sample. Same goes with the plus, and this is a higher base sample. Anything more than +4 is considered a base sample or alkalotic sample. And the figure we're given is essentially the amount of the opposite, if you like, that would be required to return our sample to normal. So let's just, to put that into some kind of English that's easier to understand, if we had a sample and it was, say, -6, then that means we need that amount of base to be added to the sample of the -6 to correct it to normal. I hope that makes sense. So I imagine I've got like a drop of blood, and we'll go the opposite this time. We'll talk about in base. Let's just say I had a drop of blood and it was +9. So very alkalotic, because it's in the pluses, it's more than +4. And I would need a certain amount of acid, say in an imaginary pipette, that I'd pick up and I'd drop into my sample to make it normal. And that is essentially what we're talking about with base excess. It's kind of saying if you have an acidotic or an alkalotic sample, this is the amount of either acid or base you would need to return that sample to normal. Okay, I do feel we get a little bit more, we ramp up a bit in this video. It gets a little bit more technical, so stay with me. And of course, if there's anything you don't understand or feel like I could explain it better, please let me know, email me or just message me via social media. So yeah, essentially, the more negative the figure, the more acidotic the sample, the more base we would need to restore that sample to normal pH. And the more plus the figure that we get from our machine, the base excess, the blood gas machines generally give you as a figure, and it's that figure that's saying, hey, this is the amount, let's just say it was a plus figure, this is the amount of acid you would need to restore that sample to a normal pH. That's essentially what it's telling you. And the good thing about the good thing about base excess is it's telling if the base excess is out of those values, so either lower than -4 or higher than +4, it is telling you that there is a metabolic process going on. And that's because base excess is only affected by fixed acids. So CO2 that we learned about in part 1 that affects the respiratory system is a volatile acid, and it doesn't really affect the base excess. So if we do have a change of normal from our base excess, then it does tell us there is a metabolic process going on that has changed the pH of that patient. Okay. And that's why it's really good, because it just helps you. I think I've got a metabolic thing going on. My base excess is out of whack. Yes, I do. That's why we can use this is where base excess comes in really handy. So that's our base excess. So our base excess will help us to know that, yeah, our sample is looking acidic and our base excess, like I said, is out of kilter, and either low or high. So we've got a metabolic component going on, okay? So that's kind of where that comes in. Now, the anion gap is used to tell us more, it's why, or the type of metabolic acidosis that we have going on. So we can use the anion gap to point us in the direction of what the cause of that metabolic acidosis is. So bear with me. We're going to just go right back to basics with the anion gap. This is rather than your machine pumping out a figure for you, this is more of a calculation. Some machines do calculate it for you and give you a figure. The machine I work with at work doesn't. We have to calculate it ourselves, but it's really quick and easy. I'm going to show you how to do that. But it's actually more of a calculation of the electrolytes that are in the patient's blood, rather than an actual just figure like the blood gas. That's the first thing to note. Within extracellular fluid, that's this ECF here, that is fluid that is outside our cells. So it's not within our cells, that's the intracellular fluid, it's our extracellular fluid, so it's the fluid around our cells and also the fluid within our blood vessels. It consists of lots of electrolytes, and we have positively charged electrolytes and we have negatively charged electrolytes. And the positive electrolytes are known as cations, and the negatively charged ones are known as anions. So this is an anion because it's negatively charged, and this is a cation because it's positively charged. I remember this because I think positive people like cats. So I remember that my cations are positive because they're just like cats. Now, normal extracellular fluid, so all that fluid outside the cells, including in the blood, should not be charged, meaning there should be an equal number of anions to cations. Okay, that's just the way it should be when the pet's well. However, it gets tricky because not all anions and cations can actually be measured. There's lots of them, and we simply just can't measure them all. Of the unmeasurable ions, we can measure as a collective, we can measure more cations than we can anions. Okay, and this is what gives us a normal anion gap, because we simply can't really measure as many we can't measure as many anions as we can cations. So we get this normal gap. That's nothing to do with the pet being sick, or there's nothing wrong with the pet, but we just simply can't measure them. Now, some examples of the anions that we can't measure are going to sound a bit weird, because you'll think, well, I can measure them, because I'm going to tell you it's albumin, things like phosphate, lactate, ketones, and urates. Yes, we can measure them, but we can't measure them well enough to be able to put it into this anion gap calculation. Okay, so that's where it gets a bit tricky. All the textbooks say these are unmeasurable ions, and you think, well, we measure them at work, like I measure lactate at work, but and that's correct, you can, but we can't measure them effectively enough to be able to actually work it out in this calculation, so we call them unmeasurable. And as I said, we can measure more cations than anions, so it is just normal that in veterinary medicine we have this normal anion gap. Okay. Now, of the ions we can measure, they're going to look really familiar because this is them. So the cations we can measure, the positive people, the sodium and the potassium, and of the anions we've got the chloride and the bicarb. So they are the ones that we can measure, and we basically use these electrolytes from our blood gas to work out the anion gap if our machine does not calculate it for us. And we do that via this calculation. So we add up the sodium and the potassium, and we add up the chloride and the bicarb, and we minus those two figures together. And as I said before, the purpose of doing the ion gap is to distinguish the cause of the metabolic acidosis. We know there is a metabolic component going on because we can see that in our blood, in our base excess, if that's abnormal, but this is going to tell us the cause, and we'll go into why or how it does that. So the normal reading that you want for an anion gap, the kind of normal gap, is under 20. When you get a patient and their reading is more than 20, it means there is an increase in the number of the unmeasured anions compared to those cations. Okay, so we already know there's a gap because we just simply can't measure all the anions like we can cations. So it's normal to have a gap. But when we've got a result above 20, the gaps are bigger, and that's abnormal. And I told you before that those unmeasurable ions could be things like ketones and lactate and urates. So of course they're all bad things, and they're all acid producers. So if we have a larger gap or a result above 20, then it's due to some kind of acid gain, which we may see on other blood work, such as lactate, ketones, uremia, things like that. So we've got acid gain, okay? When we've got an anion gap below 20, but our base excess is telling us there is a metabolic acidosis going on. So we've got a figure on our base excess below -4, but the anion gap is normal, it is 20 or below, then that means that we have a metabolic acidosis not due to acid gain, but to bicarb loss or base loss. And that's pretty important to know for our vets. So then they can decide, okay, well, they can look deeper into what might be going on here and causing this patient's problem. I hope that does make sense. So yeah, base excess is going to tell us, it's going to confirm our suspicions that we've got, there's a metabolic process going on, because it wouldn't be abnormal if there wasn't. And then the anion gap is going to tell us the reason why. So above 20, we have acid gain, and if it's normal in the face of the base excess being abnormal, then it's due to bicarb loss. Okay, now the calculation itself. So we've got an example here of one. I've done this one for you or with you. So as I said, you take the two positive electrolytes, add them up, and you take the two negative electrolytes, add them up, and you subtract those figures. So out of these examples here, we've got our 150 sodium and our 4.2. So we add them up, that comes to 154.2. Then we take our chloride, which is 111. And our bicarb, 24. We add those up. And then we get 135, and we just simply minus those from each other. And you can see in this example here, the anion gap comes to 19.2. So it's normal. It's under 20. Okay. So look, have a go at this one. Pause the video if you like. We've got an imaginary patient here. Here's a pH. We've got the base excess, CO2, bicarb, base excess. So it's a full blood gas essentially. Okay. And just try and answer these three questions. Number one, is the patient acidic? Number two, does the base excess support that? Is it abnormal? Does it support there's a metabolic component? And number three, is the anion gap normal? Sorry, so as I'm in a rush, I struggle to say the anion gap. So ignore me if I'm getting that one a little bit blurred. So yeah, have a go, pause the video, give it a go, and we'll have a look at it in a sec. Okay, so did you get it? The patient is indeed acidotic. Okay, that pH is 7.2, and normally we want 7.35 to 7.45. Does the base excess support it? Yes, our base excess is -6.7, so it's less. It's more minus than that -4, so that tells us there is a metabolic component going on here somewhere. And is the anion gap normal? It's not. It was 22.4. So this patient has a metabolic process due to some kind of acid gain. We'll probably see that, as I said, on other blood work, if not on the blood gas itself. I hope that was helpful. I know we've really just turned up the dial a bit and got a little bit more technical. It's not the easiest. So if you would like any more information, or you'd like me to keep sending you some case examples, you can now start including the base excess or the BE, and you can start working out that anion gap from all our case studies that we've been doing. So let me know how you go. Let me know what you think. As I said, I love feedback. And yeah, watch out for my next video. Bye for now. Take care.